Contrary to popular belief, air traffic controllers have a pretty uneventful job, 90% of the time. But it's the other 10% that makes air traffic control one of the most stressful jobs in the world. And today, we've been given exclusive access to go into the air traffic control tower at Toronto Pearson International Airport to learn how such a small team can manage all the airport traffic. We will also share with you a rare look inside the Toronto Area Control Center, where the majority of air traffic is orchestrated. And then we'll take it one step further, with boots on the ground next to active runways, just to give you an intimate experience with how wildlife management experts keep the airport airspace safe, so that your only concern is finding the perfect movie for your next flight. But why heavy airliners like the A380 typically land on the departure runway? Why it's not just bad weather, but also clear sunny days that demand more air traffic controllers. The real reason why flight volumes never recovered post-COVID, and why during thunderstorms, shorter flights are more likely to be cancelled than long-haul flights, is not what you think. The Toronto International Airport is an all-you-can-eat buffet with runways. Let me explain. There are 5,000 acres of green space around the airport, with 2 creeks and several ponds. This makes the airport a wildlife haven. But unfortunately, birds and airplanes are a dangerous combination, and it's only a matter of time before a bird strike leads to a serious emergency. And that's where Ivan comes into the picture. But while the team prepares the birds for their first patrol of the day, I'm gonna head over to the control tower, because I was promised a spectacular view. And that's just the bathroom. The control tower communicates only with aircraft that are within a 7-mile radius of the airport and below 2,500 feet of altitude. There are 4 primary roles inside the control tower, and air traffic controllers rotate through these roles during their shifts. Let's start with clearance delivery.
This is clearance delivery. So I talk to all the aircraft that are parked at all the gates, preparing to depart. They call up here to get their routes.
Clearance delivery tells pilots which runway to go to and what squawk code to put in their transponder. This 4-digit code is how the airplane will be identified as it flies through the airspace. In case of emergency, the pilot can change the squawk code. For example, broadcasting code 7500 tells air traffic controllers that the aircraft has been hijacked. As soon as the apron tower on top of Terminal 1 gives the go-ahead, the airplane pushes back from the gate, and now the pilot is in communications with ground controllers, who are responsible for all ground traffic except for what's on the runways. But ground controllers don't just talk to pilots who are taxiing from or to the gates. Any ground vehicles, like those used for construction, snow removal, and even this tractor towing the airplane, must coordinate their movements through ground controllers stationed inside the control tower. Anything that moves on the ground is tracked with the help of 3 ground radars stationed in different parts of the airport, and the results are displayed on the ground radar screens. For simplicity, the movements are color-coded, where departing airplanes are blue, arriving airplanes are brown, and ground vehicles are shown in yellow. But then, what's this green flag? That's what ground controllers call an uncorrelated target. Basically, the ground radars have picked up a movement, but the vehicle has no transponder to broadcast what it actually is. In this case, it was a tractor that was towing that airplane. But this ground controller knows that only because she's looking outside the window. That said, a green tag could also be an animal such as a coyote, and in some cases a false target that doesn't really exist. So if it's really foggy outside and the radar is showing a green tag on the runway, all operations would have to be halted until the runway is inspected. For decades, air traffic controllers have been using paper flight strips to help keep track of flights and their sequences, and most airports in the United States still use these paper strips. But not here. When the Toronto Tower was opened in 1997, it became the first air traffic control tower in the world to use electronic flight strips, and this was a major improvement in streamlining the operations. Once the airplane gets close to the departure runway, it switched from the ground controller to the tower controller. The tower controller directs all the traffic that's on runways and then issues takeoff and landing clearances for any aircraft that's about to depart or land. This is a critical step in any flight because the majority of airplane accidents happen during the takeoff or landing phase. But some accidents can be easily avoided if you have a bald eagle. Every day of the week, Ivan flies over a critical area of the airport. After some turning and gliding, he lands on a platform about half a mile away to enjoy the food that was left for him earlier. Ivan has been doing this for the past 24 years. That's because one of the runways is positioned parallel to a creek, which is a popular spot for waterfowls like ducks and geese.
Primary goal is to prevent these birds from making a habit of coming to the airport every day and also from establishing themselves and having their offspring there.
And this applies to local bird populations as well as migratory birds that may be passing through this area. I should highlight that Ivan's role is not to catch wildlife. Let me see if I got this right. You provide free education.
We provide free education to wildlife.
By merely flying over this creek day in and day out, Ivan turns this otherwise top-notch neighborhood into what even these ducks agree is no place to raise a family.
And it's been very effective using Ivan for 24 years. We've actually haven't had any nesting or nesting activity down by the creek.
Ivan's role is deterrence, similar to that of a strategic nuclear bomber. This approach to wildlife management kills two birds with one stone. Not only does it reduce the risk to airplanes, but it also saves wildlife itself from fatal encounters in the sky. After airplanes take off and leave the 7-mile radius of the airport, the pilot is no longer in contact with the control tower. From this point forward, it's the area controllers who'll be directing every movement of the airplane until it approaches its destination. But what do area controllers do exactly?
Level 260 to cross 10, 10 miles north of the Goose intersection level.
With thousands of airplanes in the air at all times, it's not the pilot, but the area controller who ensures two airplanes don't cross the same point at the same time. Yes, pilots are the ones flying the airplane, and yes, they get all the action. But it's the area controllers who tell the pilot what to do. If you think of the pilot as a rally driver, the area controller is the person who sits next to them and gives them detailed instructions at every turn. In fact, pilots would never make any control decisions without the permission or clearance from area controllers.
Previously mentioned traffic for you just ahead of your right wing, 3 miles northeastbound, 500 above, that's verified.
At its core, the job of an area controller is surprisingly straightforward. Ensure that aircraft maintain a safe lateral and vertical separation from each other during their flight. And this applies to a 1-ton Cessna as well as a 540-ton A380. To control aircraft, area controllers use the geographical position that aircraft transponders broadcast throughout their flight. Then, using radios, they'll tell the pilot what they want him to do. Once the airplane is about to enter a new area, it's handed off by the current area controller to the next one. There's essentially a chain of area controllers that each pilot has to go through until the airplane approaches its destination airport. But of course, it's more complicated than that. If you look at the incoming traffic into the airport, at any given time, there are dozens of airplanes coming in from various directions. But before they can land, they need to be funneled into a few manageable streams. A subset of area controllers, known as approach controllers, deal exclusively with this type of air traffic. During the funneling process, the approach controllers sequence the airplanes so that not only they're safely spaced out, but also that they're coming in at the airport's landing capacity. For example, the Toronto airport can handle about 1 landing every minute, so the approach controllers would try to match that frequency. To create space between airplanes, the controller may ask the pilot to perform one of 3 things: slow down the aircraft, circle around an area, or do what's known as vectoring, which essentially means changing the heading of the aircraft from its direct flight path. Sometimes flight delays just can't be avoided, but there is one thing that we can all avoid when traveling. For example, a little while ago, I was in the British Virgin Islands for a couple of weeks on a catamaran, which was amazing. But I still needed some internet connectivity, which would have cost me a fortune in roaming fees. But thanks to Saily, who sponsored us, I was able to take a break from being on a break in one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. The best part is that before my trip began, I downloaded the Saily app and logged into my account. Then I purchased a plan for my destination using a discount code from Saily, installed the eSIM and forgot about it. Because once I flew to the Caribbean and landed in the airport, the eSIM activated automatically, so I had full connectivity even before getting on the boat. With Saily, you just install the eSIM once. There is no longer a need to get a different eSIM when you go to different countries, no more waiting in the airport for SIM cards, and no more dealing with scammers. Saily offers some of the best rates in over 160 countries and 8 regions. To get your exclusive 15% discount on their data plans, download the Saily app and use the code NWIT at checkout. Stay connected and enjoy your next trip with peace of mind. Toronto's area controllers don't just communicate with airplanes that are landing in Toronto or taking off from there. They also handle a significant amount of overflight traffic. Overflight refers to airplanes passing through Toronto's airspace en route to other destinations like New York City, Chicago, or Boston. Here's an overflight example: a United Airlines flight heading to Chicago. If you right-click on this flight, you can see the flight plan and all the other information that an area controller may need, like altitude, arrival airport, and so on. It is critical that area controllers take overflight traffic into account, since airplanes landing in or taking off from Toronto would have to go through this overflight stream. Only when aircraft are somewhere within 5 to 7 nautical miles from the airport does the approach controller hand them over to the control tower for landing. But who decides which runway the airplane should land on? Like many other hubs, the Toronto Pearson International Airport has multiple runways, 5 to be exact. But typically, they only use 2 of them, one runway for departures and one for arrivals. That said, if the traffic suddenly increases, if a runway has to be closed, or even if the weather changes, the runway configuration may need to be adjusted, and that's the responsibility of the tower supervisor. Take a guess, what's the number one thing that impacts runway configuration? It's the wind, because aircraft always need to land or take off into the wind. This is why aircraft carriers always turn into the wind during flight ops, because it gives the aircraft extra lift, which makes for safer and more efficient operations. But airport runways are fixed and cannot turn with the wind, which is why airports have perpendicular runways. This enables the tower supervisor to operate on runways that are best suited for the current wind direction. But what's over here is what I've been excited to introduce to you all day.
My name is Tegan and I work for Falcon Environmental at Toronto Pearson International Airport.
I was actually talking about Crowley. Crowley is one of the 15 hawks employed by Falcon Environmental, the company that, among other things, provides wildlife management services at various airports in Canada. Ivan may have been able to convince other birds to move away from the creek, but that doesn't mean those birds are going to leave the airport altogether. This is why the wildlife management team patrols areas from 1 hour before sunrise until 1 hour after sunset every single day of the year. In their passenger seat, they carry a hawk, like Crowley. During the patrol, when the handlers see any birds lurking around, they roll down the window, and the hawk can't wait to chase those birds away. Think of hawks as snipers, because most of their time is spent sitting and waiting for a target. Once it's time to come back, the handler blows a whistle, and the hawk comes back to his cubicle in the back seat, where a tasty treat is awaiting him. Some of you are probably thinking, what if the hawk catches a bird? Well, they're not really allowed to eat them. This is partly done to protect the hawk from diseases like bird flu. But the more important reason is to control their weight. In fact, all these birds are weighed on a daily basis, and their diet is strictly controlled, just like an elite athlete.
Okay, I think that means get away.
Back in the control tower, a fresh pot of coffee is brewing because the air traffic is about to pick up. In the Toronto airport, one runway can handle 36 landings per hour, but that number very much depends on the lineup of aircraft that will be landing. For example, turboprops land at a much lower speed compared to turbojets, and that can reduce the landing rate. But even more importantly, air traffic controllers need to take into account wake turbulence separation between heavy, medium, and light airplanes. When a heavy airplane like the A380 lands, it leaves a large wake turbulence behind it. Depending on the weight category of the next incoming flight, the minimum separation may increase from 2.5 to 8 nautical miles. Basically, more time has to pass until the wake turbulence dissipates. And this extra wait time means the landing rate could go from 36 down to 30 per hour. To mitigate this, air traffic controllers have two tricks up their sleeve. The first one is an extremely flexible coiled audio cable that allows them to get to the coffee machine regardless of where they sit. But the real trick is called offloading. That's when air traffic controllers offload heavy aircraft into the departure lane. This keeps the arriving runway running smoothly at maximum capacity. But of course, there is a trade-off. If the departure lane is also busy, offloading can be counterproductive, because for every offload arrival, you could lose up to 3 departure slots. During peak times, both runways can be used in mixed mode. But the maximum capacity at the Toronto International Airport is reached during the triple. That's when 3 runways are used, one for arrivals, one for departure, and one in mixed mode. The triple configuration can handle roughly 120 movements per hour. But this comes at the cost of putting more pressure on those air traffic controllers, and a lot more coffee. But how do area controllers deal with peak traffic? An area controller may speak to over 1,000 airplanes in a single day. So to make their workload manageable, the air traffic needs to be subdivided. To do this, the airspace around the globe is first broken down into more than 300 flight information regions. And each of those regions is assigned to a specific Area Control Center, or ACC. We are currently at the Toronto ACC.
So this is the main screen, the radar screen.
Within the Toronto region, the airspace is further divided up into sectors. Think of each sector as a large volume of airspace, which is then assigned to one area controller who will manage any traffic that flies through it. Of course, depending on the air traffic volume and the time of the day, sectors could be divided or combined as needed. With that said, let's take a seat at the area controller's desk.
I could play with this more because it's not actually live over there and I'm kind of out of the way, so I can kind of...
This sector is called the East High. The area controller can see all the airplanes currently flying in this sector.
Planes, so Air Canada, Brickyard, Envoy, United.
The screen on the left shows the flight strips for each of those airplanes. Unlike Flight Radar 24, which shows the full path that the aircraft has flown so far, the radar screen here only shows the trail dots. This helps area controllers visually see where the aircraft is headed, without the screen being completely cluttered. To reach their destination, airplanes follow predefined highways in the sky called airways, shown as green lines on the radar. These are the routes that the aircraft follow, and they all have names like Q951, Q907, and Q931. But more important than airways are these dots, known as fixes.
Every plane flies fix to fix. They're 5-letter points globally in the world.
These fixes are actually what airplanes file on their flight plan.
This plane, so this is the route. There's Lorca right there. After Lorca, it's going to Advik. Advik is right there, right? After Advik, it's going more east coast to here. After this point, it's going
You get the idea.
more eastbound.
The combination of airways and the flight plan is what allows area controllers to anticipate how each airplane would move through their airspace. and if any fine-tuning is required, the controllers request that pilots adjust the speed, direction, or altitude of the aircraft. But by far, the biggest disruptor of organized air traffic is the weather, to the extent that airplanes sometimes have to go hundreds of miles off course just to avoid thunderstorms. But before we get into the strategies that air traffic controllers use during weather events, I want you to meet Petey, the fastest bird on the planet. He looks harmless, but this bird is a capable hunter. Petey is one of the 9 falcons here that are routinely taken out to fly throughout the day. Their job is to strike fear into the hearts of other birds that might wander into the airport's airspace. But don't let the slow-motion video fool you. Peregrine falcons have been observed to dive at 242 miles per hour, making them the fastest birds on the planet. They're like the fighter jets of the animal world. As you can tell by now, these birds have been trained to always return to their handlers after flying around. And every day, that motivation is reinforced by giving them food. But if you look closely, you'll see something on the falcon's leg. That's a lightweight GPS tracker, which is attached to the birds before leaving the office. This device provides real-time tracking of the bird's exact location, so that the handlers don't have to worry about the bird making a wrong turn. Funny enough, there is something quite similar to that inside the control tower, but for people. On the ground floor of the control tower, hidden behind closed doors, there's a full-size 360-degree simulator powered by 10 projectors. Everything here is identical to the control room upstairs, with one exception. When things go wrong here, you just press reset. I was actually told the visuals were initially too realistic looking and gave students headaches, so they changed it to look a bit more cartoonish. Simulator training is a critical part of the 18 to 30 month long process of becoming an air traffic controller with NAV Canada, especially that the simulator can generate over 100 various training scenarios and imitate different weather conditions, including rain, snow, and fog. That's because, in case there is poor visibility through the tower windows, air traffic controllers must also be able to manage their work by solely relying on radars and other instruments at their disposal. But what if there is an emergency? All air traffic control towers have these red emergency phones.
As soon as you pick up the handset, you go live over the speaker. The button is one button for an emergency alarm, another button, the red one, for a crash alarm.
Wow, it's really nice to see 1980s technology.
Yeah.
You see these 2 lights?
It's basically a visual instead of an audible alarm for the fire alarms. So it's a visual alarm that tells us one of 2 things. Either we may be on fire or we definitely need to get out.
But in case they really need to evacuate the tower, the airport doesn't shut down. The controllers go next door to the ACC, because in the same building that area controllers work, there is a dedicated backup station for tower controllers in case of such emergencies. Which makes you wonder, if the tower controllers can work remotely without being inside the tower, then why don't they? Well, in the future, they might. NAV Canada is looking at implementing remote tower control, where digital facilities use high-resolution cameras and other surveillance technologies to capture what's happening on the field, and then display an augmented video feed on an integrated set of screens. And while remote tower control could revolutionize small or remote airports, have you ever wondered how pilots can communicate with air traffic controllers stationed inside countries that don't speak the pilot's language? The answer is aviation English. English is the language of communications for commercial aviation pretty much anywhere in the world. That means even German pilots flying a Lufthansa airplane within Germany would do all the required communications with German air traffic controllers in English.
This is the German Coast Guard.
We're thinking.
What are you thinking about?
But kidding aside, you don't need to be fluent in English to communicate effectively in aviation. Instead, you just need to learn specific keywords and use a standardized phraseology. This phraseology ensures that information is always conveyed in a predictable manner using specific terms and structured communications. This can help both those who are not fluent in English and those who are new to aviation to understand and communicate more effectively. A similar issue arises as airplanes fly across time zones. To avoid any confusions, everyone uses Coordinated Universal Time, or as air traffic controllers call it, Zulu time. Toronto Pearson, as a travel hub, experiences peaks and valleys in aircraft movements. Departures and arrivals often happen in clusters, creating busy periods, followed by lulls. And things get worse when arrival and departure peaks overlap. But the biggest chaos in aviation is caused by weather events, because it forces airplanes off their organized flight path, and that creates much complexity for air traffic controllers to deal with. During thunderstorms, airplanes typically don't take off and have to sit and wait at the gates. If no gates are free for any arriving aircraft, they may end up sitting on the tarmac after landing. A massive backlog of arriving and departing flights creates a domino effect of delays and cancellations, since the airport can only handle a limited number of movements per hour. And even after the storm passes, lightning can keep ground crews indoors for safety reasons. But even once the weather fully clears, not all the backlog will be allowed to depart, because the arrival airports can only accommodate so many airplanes per hour. To address this capacity issue, NAV Canada implements flow control restrictions to limit the number of arriving aircraft in the impacted airports. But since flights that were already en route to those airports have no choice but to land there, the airlines may choose to delay or cancel short-haul flights, which haven't yet departed. The airlines are the ones who decide whether to prioritize more profitable flights or consolidate smaller flights into larger aircraft to accommodate all the passengers. All this chaos results in unplanned peak activity for the airports and the air traffic controllers. It should be obvious why bad weather often demands extra air traffic controllers on the job. But did you know that a nice sunny day can demand just as many controllers? And here is why. It's on beautiful sunny days that general aviation pilots would love to take to the skies for joyrides. So instead of one controller managing a quiet sector, 3 controllers may be needed when it gets busy. Beside weather and airspace closures, aircraft must also avoid each other while in the air. Below 41,000 feet, airplanes must maintain a minimum vertical separation of 1,000 feet. Longitudinal and lateral separation depends on where the aircraft is. For example, when flying over land, lateral separation is 3 to 5 nautical miles. But when flying over water, things get more complicated. Traditionally, ground-based radars and ADS-B receivers have been used to monitor aircraft movements. Ground-based sensors require line of sight, can be blocked by mountains, and are costly to deploy in remote areas. Also, it's almost impossible to deploy these radars in the middle of the ocean. So when airplanes flew over the Atlantic, they had to report their position via voice or data links. And the estimated position of the airplane was projected based on that information until the next report came in. But because area controllers didn't have the exact airplane positions in real time, wider safety margins were required. 60 nautical miles for lateral separation and 10 minutes, or roughly 80 nautical miles, for longitudinal separation. That was until 2019, when NAV Canada became the first organization in the world to deploy a space-based ADS-B system. With the introduction of space-based ADS-B receivers, real-time aircraft tracking became possible. This reduced the minimum separation over the Atlantic to just 14 to 17 nautical miles longitudinally and 15 to 19 nautical miles laterally. This not only resulted in fuel savings, but the real-time tracking also simplified search and rescue operations in case of an emergency. Even though by now you've had a glimpse into how air traffic control works, this job is not for everyone. Air traffic controllers could be handling 20 to 25 aircraft under frequency simultaneously, which is tough, considering that studies show the human brain can only handle up to 7 things in the short-term memory at any given time. In this job, 1 hour could be chaos and the next hour could be quiet. This is why many people consider air traffic control to be a stressful job. After all, every day, the lives of thousands of passengers are in your hands. Consider this close call in Newark Liberty International Airport, where 2 airplanes were about to land on crossing runways at the same time. The tower controller avoided a potential catastrophe by ordering the airplane on the left for a go-around. Here's another close call in the Frankfurt airport, where there was very little separation between the departing aircraft and the one landing only seconds after. To stay in top shape and minimize such mistakes, air traffic controllers work in 1 to 2 hour segments with a 40-minute break in between. When it gets really busy, there are 7 personnel working inside the Toronto Air Traffic Control Tower, and that's 2 tower controllers, 2 ground controllers, 1 clearance delivery, 1 monitor, and 1 tower supervisor. Meanwhile, 4 other personnel are taking a break, so a total of 11 would be on duty. On the contrary, during slow times, things can get a bit boring. For example, during the COVID pandemic, when there was a huge drop in air travel. Interestingly, while the number of passengers have pretty much returned to their pre-COVID levels, the number of flights never quite recovered. That's because airlines got rid of their smaller and less efficient aircraft that did shuttle routes every hour and shifted toward flying less frequent but larger and more efficient airplanes that can carry more passengers. You also gotta see this. Behind this hatch is the best kept secret of the Toronto Control Tower. If you thought your office view was great, check out this walkway. I'm sure the controllers come here all the time to take a break and enjoy the view.
No, nobody ever comes out here.
No?
Only guests, only visitors that want to come. This is part of the tour.
A huge thank you to NAV Canada for making this visit possible, allowing us to showcase the incredible work of air traffic controllers here at the Toronto Pearson International Airport. And of course, a big thank you to the team at Falcon Environmental for turning bird strikes into bird flights.